The Selfar Dominion had conquered dozens of worlds. They were an empire built on fear, crushing weaker civilizations under their superior technology. When they arrived at New Terra, they expected the same outcome: a quick invasion, submission, and control. The attack began with orbital bombardment. From space, Selfar warships rained down fire, their plasma cannons turning cities into molten ruins. The once thriving human colony was now a burning wasteland, its skyline reduced to smoldering rubble. Their scanners detected no major resistance. Their enemies, humans, were silent. Too silent. Commander Zorkson, leading the Selfar ground forces, stepped onto the battlefield. His elite soldiers spread out, securing the ruins. He expected panic, fleeing civilians, desperate survivors begging for mercy. Instead, he found nothing. Not a single living human in sight. He turned to his second-in-command. "Where are they?" The officer checked his scanner. "No life signs detected, Commander. They must have evacuated." Zorkson frowned. Something was wrong. Humans never abandoned their worlds without a fight. The resistance should have been here, engaging in hopeless battle. Instead, there was only emptiness. And then it began. A lone Selfar soldier named Krivik moved ahead of the group, his plasma rifle raised. His helmet's infrared scanned the ruins, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing. Just the remains of a collapsed building and the crackling of distant fires. Then his radio crackled. A voice whispered through the static. "You shouldn't have come here." Krivak froze. "Who said that?" he demanded. The radio went silent. A heartbeat later, a cold hand gripped his shoulder. He spun around, weapon raised, but there was no one there. His squad was 10 feet away, watching him curiously. "Did you feel that?" Krivak stammered. "Feel what?" One of them asked. Krivak swallowed hard. He had felt it. A presence. Someone had been right behind him, but his scanner showed nothing. Then, a sharp metallic sound echoed through the ruins. A helmet, Selfar standard issue, rolled onto the ground ahead of them. It was still warm. Krivak and the other soldiers stepped forward cautiously. The helmet belonged to one of their own. "Where's Merrick?" someone asked. They looked around. Merrick had been standing with them seconds ago. Now he was gone. Vanished. Panic spread through the unit. Their weapons shifted in every direction, but the enemy was nowhere to be seen. A scream cut through the silence. High above, on the broken remains of a building, they saw Merrick, hanging upside down, suspended in midair. His arms flailed, his legs kicking desperately. But there was nothing holding him. No wires, no harness. He was just floating. Then, in a blink, he was gone. The Selfar soldiers opened fire, their plasma bolts lighting up the darkness, but they were shooting at nothing. Zorgson's voice roared through their comms. "Stop firing. Get a grip, you fools." But even he couldn't hide the unease creeping into his voice. Their enemy wasn't fighting like normal warriors. There were no battle cries, no direct confrontations. Just whispers, shadows, and sudden horrifying disappearances. And then, the bodies started appearing. One by one, Selfar soldiers were found dead, their bodies placed in impossible positions. Some were stuffed inside walls, their bones crushed as if the ruins had swallowed them. Others were hanging upside down from streetlights, their faces frozen in terror. One officer trembled as he pointed toward a soldier's plasma rifle, still floating in midair, held by invisible hands. The rifle turned. It fired. The bolt hit a Selfar soldier square in the chest, sending him flying backward. His squad mates ran for cover, but now the very air around them felt alive. Something was hunting them, something they couldn't see. Zorgson clenched his fists. He refused to believe in superstition. "This is human technology," he growled. "Cloaking devices, optical camouflage. They are not spirits." But his soldiers weren't listening. Fear had already taken hold. Another voice whispered through their radios, distorted, inhuman, but unmistakably human. Run. That Xelthar didn't need to be told twice. The mighty, fearless warriors of the Dominion broke formation and ran. They abandoned their fallen. They ignored their training, and they sprinted toward their dropships, desperate to escape this haunted battlefield. But as the first dropship lifted off, something cut through the hull, slicing it open like a blade through paper. It exploded in midair. A final transmission reached Zorgsen's earpiece before everything was drowned in chaos. A low, chilling voice. Welcome to the Ghost War. The battlefield was silent now, but the fear remained. The Xelthar soldiers huddled together in what was left of their camp, their glowing yellow eyes darting in every direction. These were elite warriors, trained to conquer entire civilizations. But tonight, they were nothing more than frightened prey. Zorgsen moved through the wreckage, his mind racing. This was no ordinary enemy. The humans were using something more than just stealth technology. This was psychological warfare at its finest. They had turned the battlefield into a hunting ground, and the Xelthar were the ones being hunted. He barked orders to his officers, trying to restore some sense of control. Regroup. Form defensive positions. They're using cloaking technology, but they are not ghosts. They are flesh and blood, and they can be killed. His words were strong, but his soldiers weren't convinced. They had seen their comrades disappear into thin air. They had heard the whispers. They had watched in horror as their own weapons had turned against them. Zorgsen activated his thermal scanners. If the humans were using cloaking suits, their body heat would still be visible. He scanned the area, his eyes narrowing. But the screen showed nothing. No heat signatures, no movement, just darkness. A deep, uneasy silence fell over the camp. The wind howled through the broken buildings, carrying the faint smell of fire and death. The Xelthar tightened their grips on their weapons, their breathing shallow. Every flickering shadow looked like an enemy. Every gust of wind sounded like approaching footsteps. And then, without warning, the lights flickered. The camp's power grid shut down. The soldiers were plunged into darkness. Panic surged through them. They activated their backup visors, switching to night vision mode. The world turned into shades of green, but still, there was nothing. Then, a single red dot appeared on a soldier's visor, a targeting laser. Before he could react, a silent blade sliced through his throat. He dropped to the ground, his blood pooling beneath him. His squad mate turned to fire, but his weapon was ripped from his hands by an unseen force. He barely had time to scream before a pair of invisible hands snapped his neck. Zorgsen watched in horror as his soldiers started dropping one by one, their deaths swift and merciless. The humans weren't just attacking them. They were eliminating them, methodically, like predators taking down helpless prey. He shouted into his comms, "Deploy the drones." Now, the Xelthar's advanced scout drones flew into the air, scanning for any sign of movement. Their sensors were designed to detect the slightest energy fluctuations, capable of exposing even the most advanced cloaking technology. For a moment, the drones hovered, gathering data. Then one of them exploded, then another, and another. One by one, the drones fell from the sky, destroyed by an unseen force. Zorgsen's jaw tightened. This wasn't possible. How were the humans doing this? Then he heard it. A voice, soft but clear, whispering through his helmet speakers. "Your machines can't save you." Zorgsen turned in every direction, aiming his plasma rifle at nothing. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. He was losing control. His entire army was losing control. The Xelthar were warriors. They had fought in countless battles against all kinds of enemies. But never had they faced something like this, an enemy they couldn't see, a battle they couldn't understand. Another soldier fired blindly into the night, his plasma bolts illuminating the ruins. But he wasn't shooting at humans. He was shooting at shadows. A whisper brushed past his ear. "Boo!" A hand shot out of the darkness and dragged him away. Zorgsen saw him vanish. One second he was there, the next, gone. His rifle clattered to the ground, his body nowhere to be seen. A scream echoed through the ruins, then another, and another. The HFY were breaking. Fear had taken hold. Desperation took over. One of the officers activated an EMP charge, a powerful pulse that disabled all cloaking devices within a mile radius. The air shimmered, and for the first time, they saw them. The humans. They stood in the darkness, their bodies now visible in the eerie glow of the ruined city. They wore black, featureless armor, their helmets hiding their faces. Their eyes glowed red, like demons from an old nightmare. But it wasn't their appearance that terrified the HFY. It was the way they stood, completely still, unmoving, as if they had been standing there the entire time, just watching. One of the HFY soldiers raised his weapon. His hands were shaking. He fired. The plasma bolt never reached its target. The human soldier vanished before it could hit him, and then he was behind the shooter. A single, clean strike. The HFY soldier collapsed, his body limp. The humans moved like ghosts. One second they were there, the next they were somewhere else. No wasted movements, no sound, just death. Zorgsen's instincts screamed at him, "Run, run now." But he was a commander. He wouldn't abandon his troops. "Fall back," he roared. "Everyone fall back." A cold metal barrel pressed against the back of his head. Zorgsen froze. A voice whispered in his ear, a human voice. "Boo." The world went black. Darkness. Cold. Silence. Zorgsen's mind drifted in and out of consciousness. He could feel his body, but he couldn't move. His head throbbed, his limbs felt heavy, and a strange ringing filled his ears. His instincts screamed at him. He was captured. He forced his eyes open. The dim, flickering glow of emergency lights cast long shadows over a metal-walled room. He was inside a ruined building, restrained in a reinforced chair. His armor had been stripped down to its basic layers, his weapons taken. His claws twitched, but his arms were bound. He had been in dangerous situations before, but this was something else. He wasn't alone. Figures moved in the darkness, silent, watching, waiting. His heart pounded as he recognized them, the humans, the ones who had hunted his soldiers like prey. They weren't an army. They weren't even soldiers in the traditional sense. They were something else. One of them stepped forward, his black armor reflecting the dim light. His helmet was off, revealing a scared face with piercing, unblinking eyes. A human. Just a human. And yet, something about him felt more terrifying than any warrior Zorgsen had ever faced. The man knelt beside him, his voice calm, almost casual. "You thought you knew fear." Zorgsen clenched his jaw, refusing to respond. The man leaned in closer. "You thought we'd run, that we'd beg, that we'd kneel before your mighty dominion, just like all the others." He tilted his head slightly, studying Zorgsen the way a predator studies its next meal. "But you didn't realize the truth, did you?" The human reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled something out. He held it up between two fingers, a small, curved HFY insignia, a military identification tag, the kind that only came from a fallen soldier. Zorgsen recognized it immediately. It belonged to Krivak, one of his officers, the same Krivak who had vanished into thin air when this nightmare began. The human tossed the tag onto Zorgsen's lap. He screamed, the human said. Not at first, though. At first, he thought he could be strong. But then, as the hours passed, when the darkness settled in around him, when he realized no one was coming to save him, that's when the fear set in. Zorgsen growled, his muscles tensing against the restraints. You're monsters." The human let out a short, humorless chuckle. "Monsters." He stood up, pacing the room. "You don't get to call us that. Not after what your kind has done. Not after the millions you've slaughtered." He turned back, his expression unreadable. Your dominion conquers with brute force. You use fear as a weapon. You burn cities, kill families. You think it makes you powerful. He crouched again, meeting Zorgsen's gaze. But we understand fear better than you ever could. Zorgsen's eyes narrowed. You think you can frighten the Dominion. You think a handful of ghosts will stop us. He forced a smirk. We are endless. We will burn this world, and you will. A blade pressed against his throat. It had appeared out of nowhere, held by a second human who had been standing in the shadows the entire time. Zorgsen hadn't even sensed him. The first human shook his head. You still don't understand. You think this war is about numbers, about firepower. But this isn't just a battle. This is a lesson. He stood up and gestured around them. You think you control fear, but fear doesn't come from strength. It doesn't come from power. It comes from the unknown. It comes when you realize you don't have control anymore. He leaned down one last time, his voice barely above a whisper. And right now, you are the one who's afraid. Zorgsen clenched his teeth, refusing to give them the satisfaction. But deep down, he knew the human was right. He had never felt like this before. Not in all his years as a warrior. This wasn't war. This was something far worse. Then, without warning, the restraints clicked open. Zorgsen blinked in confusion. His arms were free. He looked up, and the humans had stepped back, watching him. You're letting me go? He asked, his voice uncertain. The human smirked. No, we're giving you a choice. He pointed toward the exit, a shattered doorway leading back to the ruins of Nuterra. You can leave. Right now. Go back to your people. Tell them what you saw. Tell them what happened here. Zorgsen's claws curled. And if I refuse? The human smirk didn't waver. Then we'll show you what real fear looks like. A slow realization crept into Zorgsen's mind. They weren't just letting him go. They were sending a message. A warning. If the Dominion came back, if they tried to conquer Nuterra again, the ghosts would be waiting. Zorgsen swallowed hard. His body ached, his pride was shattered. But he wasn't stupid. He knew a lost war when he saw one. Without another word, he stood, turned, and walked toward the exit. The darkness seemed to follow him. The ghosts did not stop him, but their presence pressed against him with every step. He didn't dare look back. Zorgsen stepped onto the bridge of the Selfar warship, his mind still clouded by what he had experienced. The towering viewports showed the dark skies of Nuterra, the remnants of battle still visible in the distant glow of burning cities. His soldiers, once proud and fearless, stood tense, their yellow eyes flickering with unease. He had made it back, but something inside him had changed. The fleet commander, Velkor, turned to face him, his expression one of barely concealed disappointment. You abandoned your forces, Velkor said coldly. Hundreds of our warriors lost, a city unclaimed. And you, he narrowed his glowing eyes. You return with no victory to show. Zorgsen clenched his fists. You don't understand what's down there. Velkor scoffed. You were bested by a handful of primitive humans, a disgrace to the Dominion. They are not primitive, Zorgsen growled. They are something else, something unnatural. The commander's mandibles clicked in frustration. Enough. We have reinforcements arriving within the hour. The full force of the Imperial fleet. We will burn this world to the ground. Zorgsen's stomach turned. He had seen what the Dominion did to defiant worlds. Total annihilation. No survivors, no mercy. He had followed those orders before. But now, the thought of Nuterra reduced to ash unsettled him in a way he didn't expect. Because deep down, he knew they wouldn't win. They're waiting for us, Zorgsen said. His voice was low but firm. You think we are the predators. We are not. They are. Velkor let out a sharp laugh. You let fear cloud your mind. Zorgsen stepped forward. No, I saw what fear truly is. And I'm telling you, attacking them again is suicide." The commander waved a hand dismissively. "Enough weakness." He turned to the fleet control officer. "Prepare for planetary bombardment." A deep hum vibrated through the ship as the main cannons powered up, preparing to rain devastation upon the surface below. Zorgsen's claws twitched. He couldn't allow this. Before he could act, the alarms blared. A distress signal flashed across the fleet's systems, not from New Terra, from their own ships. "Incoming attack," shouted one of the officers. Unknown contacts appearing all around us. Velcor snarled. Impossible. There were no human ships in orbit. Zorgsen knew better. The shadows outside the viewports shifted. Shapes began to emerge. Black ships, silent and sleek, decloaked all around the fleet. They had been there the entire time, unseen, waiting for them to make a mistake. The first attack came in complete silence. A Selfar warship exploded in a flash of fire and debris, torn apart before anyone could react. The fleet scrambled to retaliate, but it was chaos. Human ships moved faster than anything the Dominion had ever encountered. They struck like ghosts, appearing and disappearing at will, destroying ship after ship. Zorgsen watched in grim silence. This wasn't just a battle. This was a trap. A cold realization spread through him. The humans had never been on the defensive. They had been hunting them from the start. On the bridge, Velcor barked orders. "Target those ships. Fire everything we have." The fleet's cannons roared, filling space with deadly plasma bolts. But they were shooting at shadows. Human ships dodged with impossible precision, their movements too fast, too unpredictable. One after another, Selfar warships exploded, their mighty fleet crumbling before their eyes. And then, the human signal came through. A message broadcast to every Selfar vessel. A single voice, cold, unyielding. "You came to conquer. Now you will learn what it means to be hunted." It was them, the ghosts of New Terra. Zorgsen turned to Velcor. "We have to retreat." The commander snarled, fury in his gaze. "Never. The Dominion does not." A human strike team suddenly materialized on the bridge. They had boarded the ship without a sound. Black armored figures, glowing red visors, the same demons Zorgsen had faced on the surface. They moved with inhuman precision, cutting down Selfar officers in seconds. Velcor barely had time to react before a human blade pierced his chest. He gasped, eyes wide in disbelief, before collapsing to the floor. Zorgsen didn't fight. There was no point. A single human warrior stepped forward, helmeted, silent, watching him. Zorgsen met his gaze. He knew what this meant. He was being spared. Again. The humans wanted him to carry the message back. That Selfar Dominion was no longer the hunter. Humanity was. Without a word, the humans vanished once more, leaving only destruction behind. Zorgsen stood in the silence of his ruined bridge, the fleet burning around him, and for the first time in his life, he understood true fear. Zorgsen drifted through the wreckage of his fleet, his escape pod tumbling in the darkness of space. Fires burned in the void where mighty warships had once stood. The Selfar Dominion's invasion force was gone, obliterated by an enemy they had never understood. The humans hadn't just won. They had broken them. His mind raced as he tried to process what had happened. The ghosts of New Terra had outmaneuvered, outgunned, and outthought the Dominion at every turn. Even with superior technology, even with overwhelming numbers, the Selfar had been nothing more than prey. The pod systems flickered to life, the emergency beacon activating. A signal pulsed, calling for rescue. Zorgsen clenched his fists, staring at the screen. He knew who would receive that signal. The Dominion. And when they did, they would come back. Stronger. Angrier. This wasn't over. A cold voice interrupted his thoughts. "You are afraid." Zorgsen's breath caught in his throat. The pod was sealed. There was no one inside but him. And yet, the voice was there. Low, calm, human. The lights flickered. The temperature dropped. A shadow moved in the corner of his vision. No, that was impossible. His claws tightened on the armrests as he forced himself to speak. Who's there? Silence. Then, a whisper. You carry a message. His heart pounded. He had heard these voices before, on the surface, in the darkness, when his men had disappeared one by one. The ghosts of New Terra. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was inside his mind. Zorksen growled, shaking his head. You can't be here. A flicker. A shape in the dim glow of the emergency lights. A human figure, helmeted, featureless, standing right in front of him. Zorksen lunged, his claws swiping at empty air. Nothing was there. The voice returned, softer this time. You think you can run from fear. Zorksen pressed his back against the pod's wall, breathing heavily. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Yet the humans had done the impossible before. What if this was real? The voice continued, calm, patient. Your dominion believes fear is a weapon. That terror bends lesser species to its will. A pause. But fear isn't about power. Another flicker. The human figure was closer now. Fear is knowing you are already dead. The lights went out. Zorksen roared, slamming his fist into the control panel, forcing the emergency lights back on. The pod was empty. He was alone. But his heart was still racing. He was one of the greatest warriors of the Dominion. He had faced countless battles, killed countless enemies. And yet, sitting in the silence of his escape pod, surrounded by the ruins of his fleet, he had never felt fear like this. The beacon continued to pulse. Somewhere out in the vastness of space, the Dominion would hear his distress call. They would come. They would seek revenge. But the ghosts of New Terra would be waiting. Zorksen closed his eyes. For the first time in his life, he prayed they wouldn't. That Selfar Dominion never spoke of the massacre at New Terra, not officially. The fleet that had been sent to conquer the planet never returned. No glorious victories were recorded. No celebrations were held. It was as if the entire invasion had simply vanished. But the survivors, the few who had escaped, whispered of something else. A horror unlike anything the Dominion had ever faced. A nightmare that walked in the shadows. They called them the ghosts of New Terra. Zorksen had been taken directly to the High Council, the rulers of the Dominion. He had expected punishment, expected exile, maybe even execution for his failure. But the moment he stepped into the towering chamber, all he saw was fear. The counselors, some of the most powerful beings in the Dominion, sat in silence as he approached. Their glowing yellow eyes locked onto him, but none of them spoke. At last, one of them, Elder Valruk, leaned forward. His voice was low, careful. Tell us, what happened? Zorksen took a slow breath. He had replayed the battle over and over in his mind. The ambush, the silence, the shadows that moved like living things, the soldiers who had been there one moment and gone the next. And then the voice, the one that had whispered to him in the darkness of his escape pod. Even now, he could still hear it. You think you can run from fear. Zorksen clenched his fists. We underestimated them. Elder Valruk's mandibles clicked. The humans. Zorksen hesitated. No, he shook his head. Not humans, something else. The counselors exchanged glances. One of them scoffed. You expect us to believe that primitives could wipe out an entire Dominion fleet? Zorksen's eyes burned with frustration. They didn't understand. He had seen countless wars. He had fought in battles that had lasted years. But this wasn't war. This was a warning. He took a step forward, lowering his voice. We were never fighting an army. We were fighting shadows. We were fighting ghosts. One of the counselors sneered. Superstition. Zorksen turned sharply. Then tell me, Where is our fleet? His voice echoed through the chamber. Where are our warships? Our soldiers? If the humans are weak, then why did none of them return? Silence. No one had an answer. Because there was no answer. Another counselor, an older warrior with scars from past campaigns, exhaled slowly. You truly believe the humans did this? Zorkson met his gaze. I don't believe. He swallowed. I know. The chamber fell deathly quiet. Then Elder Veilruck spoke again. You are telling us that the Dominion should fear them. Zorkson's claws curled. No. He looked at them, his gaze sharp. I am telling you that we already do. The counselors shifted, uncomfortable. Warriors of the Dominion did not speak of fear. But Zorkson had seen something beyond fear. The counselors debated for hours after that, but Zorkson already knew what the decision would be. The Dominion would not send another fleet. They would not risk another war. New Terra was marked as a forbidden world. Unconquered, untouched, a place where even the mighty Selfar Dominion did not dare tread. As time passed, the truth of what happened was buried. The official records claimed the battle had never taken place, that no fleet had ever been lost. But among the soldiers, among the warriors who had heard the whispers, who had seen the ruins of the broken fleet, the story lived on. A legend, a warning passed from one warrior to another, spoken only in hushed tones. Never go to New Terra. Because if you do, the ghosts will find you, and they will show you what it truly means to be afraid.